Imagine walking into your local grocery store, picking up a jar of golden, slow-pouring honey, and realizing you are holding a literal miracle of industrial engineering. To you, it is a sweet topping for your morning toast. To the creature that made it, it is a matter of absolute life and death. Right now, as you read this, a single honeybee is flying at 15 miles per hour, her wings beating 200 times every single second. She is on a desperate, calculated mission. To produce just 1 single pound of the honey sitting in your pantry, a colony of bees must visit more than 2 million flowers. They will collectively fly over 55,000 miles, a distance equivalent to circling the entire globe twice, just for that one jar. And the most shocking part? An individual worker bee will labor tirelessly every single day of her short life, only to produce about 1/12 of a single teaspoon of honey. Every drop of honey is a monument to collective genius, mathematical precision, and grueling, exhausting labor. It is a substance that never spoils. Archaeologists have excavated pots of honey from ancient Egyptian tombs that are over 3,000 years old, and it is still perfectly edible. How does a tiny insect transform volatile flower nectar into a sweet, eternal superfood? The answer is not just a biological curiosity. It is a high-stakes, highly organized story of chemistry, architectural mastery, and a brutal, unflinching division of labor. To understand how honey is born, we have to look past the beautiful, chaotic hum of a summer meadow and step directly into the mind of the ultimate cooperative worker, the foraging bee. #### The Great Harvest. Inside the honey stomach, the process begins in the heart of a blossom. Flowers use nectar, a sugary, watery liquid, as a deliberate bribe. They want bees to visit them, pick up pollen, and carry it to the next flower to assist in plant reproduction. The bee, however, is not thinking about the flower's reproductive future. She is on a strict collection deadline. When a foraging bee lands on a flower, she unfurls her proboscis, a long, straw-like tongue that functions as a highly efficient pump. She drinks the nectar deep into her body. But this nectar does not go into her regular stomach to be digested. Bees possess a specialized anatomical marvel called the honey stomach, or crop. This is a dedicated biological backpack used exclusively for transport. It sits just before the bee's true digestive stomach, separated by a microscopic, one-way valve called the proventriculus. If the foraging bee gets hungry and needs energy to keep flying, she can open this valve to let a tiny amount of nectar pass into her own digestive system. But the vast majority of the nectar remains trapped in the honey stomach, completely isolated from her own digestion. As the bee moves from flower to flower, filling her cargo hold, a remarkable chemical reaction begins right inside her body. The bee's salivary glands begin secreting a powerful enzyme called invertase into the nectar. Raw flower nectar is composed largely of sucrose, the exact same complex, heavy sugar found in standard table sugar. Sucrose is a disaccharide, meaning it is made of two simpler sugars bonded tightly together. The invertase enzyme immediately goes to work like a pair of chemical scissors, snipping those complex bonds and breaking the sucrose down into glucose and fructose. This molecular shift is the critical first step in making honey easily digestible and highly concentrated. By the time the foraging bee's honey stomach is completely full, it weighs almost as much as she does. Her flight back to the hive is a grueling, heavy-lift transport mission. ###The mid-air handshake, the hive assembly line. When the exhausted foraging bee finally touches down on the landing board of the hive, her job is only half done. In fact, she won't even see the honeycomb where the honey is stored. Inside the entrance of the colony waits a dedicated team of younger bees known as processor bees or house bees. The foraging bee approaches a house bee, opens her mandibles, and regurgitates the modified nectar. The house bee extends her own proboscis and drinks the liquid directly from the mouth of the incoming flyer. This intimate, mouth-to-mouth transfer is known as trophallaxis. This is where the honey-making process accelerates into a highly coordinated assembly line. The foraging bee, now emptied of her heavy cargo, immediately turns around and flies right back out into the field to gather more. Meanwhile, the housebee takes the liquid deeper into the dark, pulsating heart of the hive. The housebee does not simply dump the nectar into a wax cell. It is still far too watery. Raw nectar is roughly 80% water and only 20% sugar. If you were to store it in this state, opportunistic bacteria and wild yeast spores floating in the air would immediately land in it, cause it to ferment, and turn it into a sour, bubbling, toxic mess. To create a food source that can survive the freezing months of winter without rotting, the bees must completely flip that ratio. They need to reduce the water content down to less than 18%. To achieve this, the housebee begins a process called processing, which looks like a master class in organic chemistry. She finds a quiet spot in the hive and begins pumping the droplet of nectar in and out of her mouth, spreading it out across her tongue and exposing it to the warm, dry air of the hive. Each time she rolls the droplet out, a tiny bit of water evaporates into the air. As she manipulates the liquid, she adds even more enzymes from her own body. In addition to invertase, she introduces glucose oxidase. This specific enzyme breaks down a small amount of the glucose, transforming it into gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. This is the hive's ultimate secret weapon. The gluconic acid makes the liquid highly acidic, creating an environment where harmful microbes cannot survive. The trace amounts of hydrogen peroxide act as a natural, continuous disinfectant. This chemical shield ensures that even while the liquid is still watery and vulnerable, bacteria cannot take hold. ### The physics of evaporation. The living ventilation system. Once the housebee has manipulated the droplet for about 20 minutes, reducing the water content slightly and thoroughly mixing in her chemical defense system, she deposits the droplet into an open, hexagonal wax cell. But the mixture is still far too thin to be called honey. It is more like a sweet soup. The collective now has to shift from chemistry to industrial engineering and thermodynamics. To drive out the remaining moisture, the bees transform the entire hive into a giant, living dehydrator. Hundreds of worker bees line up throughout the hive in strict formation. They anchor their feet firmly to the wax structure and begin vigorously fanning their wings in perfect unison. This is not a chaotic, random flapping. It is a highly coordinated ventilation system. The bees draw cool, dry air inward through the hive's main entrance, push it up through the crowded lanes of the brood nest, sweep it across the open, wet honey cells, and blast the warm, moisture-laden air out of the top of the hive. If you stand near a healthy beehive on a warm summer night, you won't hear a gentle buzz. You will hear a deep, mechanical, resonant roar. It is the sound of thousands of tiny air conditioning units working together to dry their winter food supply. As the hot, dry air rushes over the thousands of open cells, the water rapidly evaporates out of the nectar. The liquid thickens, transforming from a watery syrup into a dense, viscous, sticky gold. The bees monitor the progress with incredible precision. They use their highly sensitive antennae to gauge the exact moisture level of the liquid. Day and night, the fanning continues until the moisture level drops below that magical 18% threshold. At this precise concentration, the sugar solution becomes hypertonic. It is so dense with sugar that it physically draws water out of any bacteria or fungal cell that attempts to land on it, effectively dehydrating and destroying the microbe instantly. The nectar has officially become honey. ###. The final seal of preservation. Now that the honey is physically and chemically stable, the bees face one final engineering challenge. Honey is highly hygroscopic, meaning it acts like a sponge for moisture. If the bees leave the finished honey exposed to the open air inside the hive, it will slowly reabsorb water vapor from the atmosphere, the moisture content will rise back up, and the risk of fermentation will return. To prevent this, the bees execute the final step of the production line, capping. Specialized wax-producing bees secrete tiny flakes of pure beeswax from abdominal glands. They chew this wax to make it pliable and use it to construct a microscopically thin, completely airtight seal over every single cell filled with finished honey. Think of it as the biological equivalent of home canning. By sealing the cell with an airtight wax lid, the bees lock out the atmosphere, trapping the honey in a perfect, immutable state of preservation. It will now sit in the dark hive, completely immune to time, waiting for the cold, bleak days of winter when there are no flowers left alive. ####. Why do they do it? The economics of survival. To truly appreciate this massive industrial effort, we have to look at the cold, hard math of hive survival. A standard honeybee colony requires about 60 to 80 pounds of honey just to survive a single winter. Unlike many other insects, honeybees do not hibernate. When winter strikes and temperatures drop below freezing, the queen and her workers do not die off or go to sleep. They stay awake, forming a tight, vibrating ball around the queen bee called a winter cluster. To keep the queen warm, the bees flex their massive flight muscles continuously, generating pure metabolic heat. They can keep the center of that winter cluster at a staggering 93 degrees Fahrenheit, even when the outside world is buried under feet of snow and ice. But running a living heating element takes an immense amount of physical energy. The fuel that powers those vibrating flight muscles is sugar. Specifically, it is the honey they spent the entire spring and summer collecting, processing, and sealing. If the colony runs out of honey before the first flowers of spring emerge, the furnace shuts down, and the entire colony freezes to death in a matter of hours. This stark reality explains the frantic, obsessive work ethic of the hive. Bees are hardwired to gather food far beyond their immediate needs whenever weather permits. They are hoarding for a future they might not even live to see, because the average summer worker bee lives for only about 6 weeks, literally wearing her wings down to ragged stumps from constant flight. #### The sweet connection. From hive to jar. When a human beekeeper harvests honey, they are stepping into this delicate loop. Responsible beekeepers only harvest the surplus honey, the extra bounty that a healthy, vigorous colony produces above the 80 pounds they need for their own winter survival. The beekeeper removes the wax frames, uses a heated knife to carefully slice off the airtight wax caps, and places the frames into a centrifugal extractor. As the machine spins, the honey is slung out of the cells, running down the walls to be collected, filtered of stray wax bits, and bottled. No chemicals are added, no complex cooking processes are required, and no artificial preservatives are needed. The golden liquid inside the jar is exactly what the bees created in the dark geometry of their hive. The next time you unscrew a jar of honey and watch it slide off your spoon, take a moment to look at it closely. You are looking at a substance that required millions of flights, a masterclass in enzymatic chemistry, a massive thermodynamic effort of collective wing fanning, and the entire lifework of hundreds of tiny, dedicated creatures. It is the liquid essence of 1,000 fields, distilled by the ultimate cooperative society into a drop of pure, eternal gold.